Okay. The second part of this covenant study that we're going through is the covenant at Sinai. We started by talking about the plagues and the darkness, the Passover, and the crossing of the Red Sea. And we said the components of any covenant is God's calling. Number one, the response of faith by people. And we saw God's calling in Abraham, and we see it also in Israel by God calling Moses. And he called him with the burning bush. Moses made objections. God overcome the objections. Now he's going to go and call the people. This time, different than Abraham and Noah, it is not on Moses, it's on the people. So God's going to call the whole hundreds of thousands. So how are you going to do that? He's not going to go and meet everybody in their houses. And Abraham, it was easy. It was one man with his family. Noah, the same thing with his family. Now you have the people of God as multiple. So what do you do? If you were the counselor of God, if that's possible, it's crazy. What would you ask him to do? Would you tell God, go into each house and deal with every family alone with the head of the family? Or would you ask him to do what? To bring one person, talk to him, convince him to be or commission him to be the liaison, the mediator. So from now on, you're going to have somebody that actually acts as a mediator, which is, we just defined him as a prophet. He is the mediator. Prophets will be the mediators between God and his people. Since God's people now is not a single family. They are nation. They're huge. But God is actually going to do something more. If he's going to do the covenant with the people, he's going to have that prophet prepare them to meet God face to face. He's not going to abandon this idea of talking to them and have their response to him directly, which is crazy. Who is going to do that? Which God have you ever heard about in history that will invite a whole nation to make a covenant with him? I've never heard about it. It's not written in history. None of the Egyptian gods or the Roman gods have done this. They always appear to somebody and that someone would say, I've met God and I know he lives there and he told me to do so and so. It's up to you to believe or not. But to bring the whole nations to meet you, this is crazy. So he used Moses as a prophet, not to be just a mediator, but to bring the people to make a personal covenant with each family, with each one of them. So this is the idea now. So he called Moses, Moses called the people, and the people responded in faith. See, the letter to the Hebrews says, they believed Moses. They believed because he had signs. He brought signs to them. So how did you know that they believed? Two things, major things, the letter to the Hebrews bring in. He says, when he told them to sacrifice the Passover lamb, what did they do? They did it or didn't do it? They did it, which means they believed. When he asked them to cross the Red Sea after it's opened, they did it or didn't do it? They did it. So they responded in faith. We call that the righteousness of faith. They proved worthy of the calling of God because they trusted God and listened to the calling. So the first item was the calling and the response. The second item is they have to go through a cleansing process. Once they get approaching God to come into a relationship with God, you have to be cleansed from the world. God's going to take them to be his children. Let's say you are interested in adopting a child, and they tell you, we don't have much children for adoption except those homeless children in the ghettos, and there's a lot of them in the streets living in the mud. Okay, so you go and pick a child. It's like you're going to the pet store and picking a pet, right? And you look at it, you like it, it's cute, it's nice, and then what? You bring it to home. What is the first thing you do if they're bringing them from the mud? You have to clean them. So it is not something ritual. It's not something that you have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, it is actually the natural process. You want to adopt somebody, you go pick them up, and they agree to come with you. What if the child starts kicking? I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I want to go with mommy. I want to go to this man. And so you're just going to say, okay, can't take him against. They will always hold a grudge against you because you took them against their will. But then a second step would be to do what? To wash them. They need to be washed to bring them closer to God. All humanity outside of the relationship with God had marred themselves in mud. We marred ourselves by the fall of Adam. We grow out of the relationship with God in mud. So our relationship with God to be restored, we have to be clean. Simple, straightforward. So the first thing he does is bringing them to him. He has to baptize them in the Red Sea. They go through the Red Sea to be baptized, and they shed off, they let go of Egypt. Egypt is kind of washed out of them. So then the next step, what to do? Through a sacrifice, and over the sacrifice, you will say your commandments. You've already made the promises. God already makes the promises ahead of time. He tells Abraham before he invites him up, I will do. So Abraham comes out. So he gave them the promises in chapter 6. He said, I am the Lord, I'm Yahweh. It means I will sanctify you, make you holy. He's going to do this all the time, make us holy all the time, all the time, all the time. Second one, I will judge the Egyptians to get rid of this control that they have over you. I will judge them. Third one, I will redeem you, bring you back to me, because you were mine when I sanctified Abraham and I asked him to offer Isaac, and through Isaac on the altar, I took you to be my people. Now I'm going to have to redeem you. I let you be in Egypt custody for a little bit, but now I want you back. I'm going to the pawn shop. I'm paying a price, the Passover lamb, to bring you back to me. So that's called redemption, to redeem, to take back. And I'm going to do this. That's the third promise. And the fourth promise, I'll bring you to the promised land to live with you and make my abode in your heart, in your center, in the temple. Those are the 4 promises. Now he's going to bring them to the mountain. And in the mountain, when they are on the mountain, he will show himself to them. And they will see God. And they will ask a very interesting question. Whoever out of all the nations had seen the Lord their God face to face and lived? We never heard about that. Never. And over that scene, God is going to start uttering the 10 words, the 10 commandments. And he would have them sign on those commandments. He says, as long as you consider yourself my children and I'm your God, you have to abide by those. You want to despise me? And he's going to say that to David when we were looking to David. You want to despise me? Break those commandments. You want to make me feel like I'm nothing to you? Break those commandments. And over that, Moses is going to take the blood of the sacrifices they just killed and sprinkle it on the book where he written all the commandments. He had written them one by one. And he says he spilled the blood over the commandments and also on the people. And what did he say when he spilled the blood and he started to sprinkle the blood? What did Moses say in chapter 24? He said, this is the blood of the covenant that God has made with you. So this is the 4th step. So we said calling, response of faith, cleansing, sacrifice, and commandment. And by that, you seal the covenant. It ends up with a meal. They have to end up with a meal, like any wedding, like any adoption. Once adoption formula is finished, what does the father do? They make a feast, celebration. This is like almost like, today I have a child, as if it is the birthday. So there is a meal. And the marriage is the same way. Once a person, a man and wife get married, after they finish the ceremony in the church, what do they do usually? They celebrate where everybody's invited. So in this, you finish with a meal. So again, what's the steps of the covenant again? It's natural progress of any covenant. 1, calling, God calls. 2, the response of faith, we call it righteousness of faith. 3, the cleansing. They have to have some purification process. I cannot take someone who is dirty to be in my house, which is very clean, unless first I do what? It's my responsibility that I wash them. They get washed. And then the 4th is a sacrifice with the commandments. I'm going to say the commandments. And end up with a celebration meal. meal that we gather together and eat and have fun. That's how a covenant is made in old times and in the new times. Now, I'm going to ask the questions. Why the manna was and the rock? So on the way to the mountain, they needed to eat and drink. There was manna and the rock. How was the preparation for the covenant ceremony? What did Moses ask him to do and what God asked him to do before they get into the mountain? What is the role of the commandments in the covenant at Sinai? What did they mean, the commandments? What were the different aspects of the covenant ceremony? What measures were given in Deuteronomy to assure the keeping of the commandments? Since Moses knew these commandments are very detrimental, they are actually, if they break them, things will get bad. They will be very, very much in trouble. So he said, I will have to, and actually inspired by the Holy Spirit, to give some measures, certain measures, that they will never forget the commandments and keep remembering them all the time. Sometimes people, human beings, have a tendency to forget. You tell the child, didn't I tell you? For example, don't leave your plates on the table. Mom, I'm sorry, I forgot. So if this happens in something more serious, mom or dad will have to get some reminders for the child to remind them, maybe write a little piece of paper on the table that says, please, under the plate or in front of the plate. Say, please take your plates to the sink when you're done. So when he's done, they see that. There's some measures they have to do. Someone who's doing like not doing well in tests, they forget how to copy the question very clearly, and so they take with them a little piece of paper and they put it in the desk when they are making the test. Please watch for copying errors, something like that. So there is some things that measures that Deuteronomy will say to the Israelites to make sure they don't forget. And they had no Holy Spirit, so there were no reminders inside of them. They had to do it from the outside. Yes. Huh? Okay. The first point, the Lord sanctifies his people. What does he do, God? And he's doing it. He did it with them. He's doing it with us. He's training his people for trust and obedience. You too. You want something spiritual to take home with you? All your life is trained for trust and obedience to God. Trust that things will go okay if you keep the obedience. Trust that God will take care of things eventually, even how bad it is right now, or whatever problems you go through, it will be okay at the end because he is with us. So the first lesson that is about trust and obedience is the one in Mara. Mara is the first station. Why they call it Mara? The name was not Mara. They called it Mara. Mara means bitter. They get out of the Red Sea. They see the Egyptians dead. They get excited. They sing a song. Now they have to start the march to the Promised Land. They were supposed to be in the Promised Land in 40 days maximum. They're going to spend 1 month by the Sinai, by the mountain, establish things, build a tabernacle. And then they move, and they suppose reach the Promised Lands in 10 days. 10 days after that. So 40 days. So all in all, from the coming out of Egypt will be 3 months. That's it, basically. And that's all what they needed to do. But what happened when they go through a place and they get thirsty? They find the pool of water. They start drinking from the pool. It's very bitter. The water is too bitter to drink. So they scream. And then this is the verse was given in chapter 15 after the song. And this will continue actually in different ways. There, God actually told Moses, he showed him a tree. He said, take a branch from that tree, throw it in the water. He threw it in the water. What happened? He said, take from the water. The water was sweet, was actually not bitter anymore. The fathers of the church, this is actually said the beginning of it is the cross. The tree that actually made the life sweeter for us is the cross. But he says there he made a statute, a law, and an ordinance for them. This is the beginning of the talk. And there he tested them and said, listen to this. This is the beginning of the journey. If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. What's he saying? Fresh, before you forget. You came out of Egypt, there were 10 plagues. They're still fresh in your mind. Before you forget about those plagues, remember, I'm the one who brought them. And if you listen to my commandments, he didn't give them the commandments yet. He's preparing them. If you listen to the commandments, none of those plagues will be in you. But if you start noticing that plagues are coming on you, it means you had forgotten and you did not do the commandments. So this is the beginning in Mara. And again, it is training for trust and obedience continuously. This is your life, their life, and mine. That we all are going to live our lives in training for trust and obedience every single day of your life. Every single day is almost like a camp, a boot camp for believing in God and obedience to Him. That's how we see ourselves in our lives. That was the first test, that bitter water. He says, I'm turning the bitter water to sweet for you because I can do it. This is me. But you have to do what? So this is the mutual relationship in the covenant. He takes care of their needs. They do what? What's their portion of the covenant? What do you need to do? To trust and obey. Keep the commandments. Okay? The next test of obedience and trust is manna. Immediately, that's 15. At the end of 15, go into 16, the same thing happens again. We're hungry, we're so famished, we want some food. And they start thinking about, we need some meat. Okay? So, in Deuteronomy, Moses wrote this. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness, these 40 years? Listen, what is the reason? To humble and test. Again, the idea of testing. The humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Very interesting. You know this verse. But the background of it is this, that you actually are going to hunger, and this is when we go into fasting, to look always to God, not to the world. So the same question that Jesus asked Philip, Philip, where do we get bread for those people? What did Philip say? 200 denarii worth of bread. Where is his mind going? Is that trust? That's not trust. So when the Israelites in the Sinai, they're going to be hungry, what do you think? This is desert. Of course there's no food. That's obvious. You don't need a child to tell you that. So what should we do? What's the only solution for them? Go back to Egypt. Is that trust? That's not trust. So this is a test. It's a test. What will you do when you're hungry? What you will do when you're in need? What will you do? Will you stretch your hand to the world? Will you go back to the world and make the friendship that you broke? The manna is given to Israel on daily basis. The men would collect it from the ground every morning. God gave the Israelites specific instructions in collecting the daily bread. These instructions included, look at the instructions, collecting it daily except Saturday. Don't go look for it on Saturday. Why? I'm God. I told you to rest on Saturday, and one of the commandments I'm going to give you, keep that day holy. Don't work for food on it. This practice had double intention. Let's go to the intentions. Keeping the Sabbath holy, that's the first intention, that they actually listen to that one commandment that says do not work on the Sabbath. That's the first intention. The second intention, trusting God for every day's provision. Let's give us today our daily bread. That's what we say in Our Father. Then, and I love this from the wisdom. This piece from the wisdom is very beautiful. It's actually a bit longer, but I wanted to bring it here. The Book of Wisdom of Solomon. The Book of Wisdom of Solomon has lots of gold nuggets. If you read it, will be surprised by all the things that's written in it. You fed your people the food of angels. And without their labor, you provided them with ready-made bread from heaven, fitting for every pleasure and suitable to every taste. For your provision manifested sweetness toward your people. Beautiful. It's like a poetry. What is that? God is sweet. God is sweet. And the manna was sweet. And they said in the book of wisdom, it says it was fitting for every pleasure and suitable for every taste. Those who wanted it very sweet, unlike extremely sweet things dripping with honey, they found it very sweet. And those who didn't like it to be very sweet and they wanted to be a little bit less sweet, they found it less sweet. When they gathered a lot, nothing remained for the next day. They were actually measuring it by omer, and everybody got an omer. And someone who slacked a little bit, didn't collect a lot, it also fitted into an omer for everyone. It's miraculous. What is that? It says that God is showing his sweetness toward his people. So how much he loved them. But he's not spoiling them. He's not spoiling them. And the third one, the change in the manna that was kept overnight was very significant. From a sweet wafer with honey that tasted and smelled so beautiful to a stinky material that rotted and worms came out of it. And this is very interesting because you don't really, if you leave wafers, if you have wafers at home and you leave them for 10 years, what happened to them? Would they stink? No, wafers don't stink when you leave them. What do? They can get moldy. They change their taste a little bit, but not that dramatic change. It decayed like flesh, bred worms and stank. This was a sign of the fate of those who lacked trust in God to provide them daily with their needs. If you collect it and you fill the omers, you go back to the fields and collect again, what does that mean? You're not sure that God's going to bring it tomorrow. So maybe you should keep it because one more day is better to be safe. But this immediately resulted in a stinky house, a stinky tent. And its smell was so bad that immediately gave them in their faces a response. Why is that? I made a reference here, if you want to read it in the book, to the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 3. He said, those who did not trust God for their lack of faith, their bodies were thrown in the wilderness. They were stinky and wormy after they had done their life in the wilderness, never reached the promised land. What's that? It's a lesson. You're eating this stuff. If you're eating that stuff and you never had a day that stank in your house, you'll make it to the promised land. But if you didn't and it stank in your house, that means what? You don't trust God. You're not making it. You're not going to make it. Same thing for us today. If we don't have faith and trust in God and we don't live daily on that test of trust, what happens? We too will not make it to heaven. That's the point. The next point, not to keep from it to the next day except on Fridays. This allowed the Israelites to abstain from working, as I said, on Sabbath, and was proof of the divine involvement in their daily life. Every day they're living by a miracle. Every day. Not just living it, not one decision. Sometimes you think about this, I need to make one-time decision in my life and commit to God, and that's it. No, it's going to be a daily commitment you're going to do every day, and you're going to live by miracles every day. To keep one person's quota in a pot in the Ark of the Covenant and remained unchanged, never decayed. This remained with them for many hundred years, almost 1,000 years until the Ark disappeared. What does that mean? That one quota, one person's portion of manna stayed forever. What does it mean? Means there's somewhere a food that when a person eats from it, it does not decay and will make them live forever. What's that? And why the Israelites couldn't eat from that? This was the manna that was in the Ark of the Covenant with the glory of God, the Shekinah, the glory, the presence of God was always there. So where God present is, no decay ever happened. No change ever happened. What is this pointing to? What is that food that will last for everlasting life that Jesus actually promised? The body and blood of Christ, that his presence is there. This is his divinity is always united to his Humanity never separated for a single moment, nor a twinkling of an eye. So when you eat that food, you're eating the hidden manna that was kept away from Israel. In the Gospel of St. John, chapter 6, the Lord hinted to the manna as a type of the Eucharist. The Eucharist is the true bread from heaven, the food which endures for everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him. He's referring to both the chapter 16 in Exodus and to the wisdom verse that we said, the bread from heaven. Nowhere else it's written that the manna was a bread from heaven except in wisdom. So Jesus is hinting to wisdom too, the bread from heaven. The manna was God's special food for Israel. It was a daily practice in obedience and trust in God. The Eucharist is God's special food for us, through which we are consecrated as God's special people. The manna was a special food for special people. It was not given to everybody. So God is making them holy, not just by the Passover lamb, not by crossing the Red Sea, not by making miracles for them, but their food. They have a special food, and they have, we're going to see, special drink. The split rock. When Israel thirsted, God told Moses to strike a special rock in front of them. When Moses did, an explosion of water came out of the rock, splitting it in half. How do I know that it's split in half? It's not in Exodus. It's in the Psalms. I'm going to tell you about the Psalms soon. When the rock was split clean in half, in two, exactly in the middle. A burst of water made a lake under the rock for them to drink. The force of the water geyser reflected the force of God's care for his people. You're thirsty? Ya habbit aini, ya albi. You're thirsty? What happens when a child is thirsty and he says to his mom or dad, Dad, I'm thirsty? What do? They bring the whole fountain. They want to bring everything they can, right? So this is what God did. The amount of force in this rock to be split and to be shattered like this shows the care that God has for his people. This is the rock. It's one of the rocks, actually. There were many of them. We're going to say this in the Psalms. The verse for this, that's God, split the rocks in the wilderness, rocks with an S is plural, and gave them drink in abundance like the depth. Abundance like the depth. Sometimes you think the rock was like a little rock with a trickle of water coming down. And if you have like 750,000 people standing in line with their jugs with the trickle, how long do you think it's going to take for them to drink? You'll be able to finish maybe 10,000 people by the end of the week, and the rest of them will be dead, right? So this has to be, because he said, and you gave them drink in abundance, like the depth, you opened to them fountains of water. He also brought streams out of the rock and caused waters to run down like rivers. That's exactly it. And this is in Saudi Arabia, in the northern west area, south of Jordan, where they have this place, and the Saudis, actually the Bedouins, know that this is the Rock of Moses. The same force that can be seen in the cross of the Son of God. There was a force there. When the soldier stuck his side with the spear, what happened? Water and blood came out of it with force. The split rock represented Christ from the 1 Corinthians 10. They had to be many rocks in their way of wandering in the desert to support their journey. They would have to trust God for supplying water as well. This is the verse from Psalms. Go from wisdom. It's wisdom 16:20. And then all the references I said in the Psalms is 78, 16, and 17. Okay.